Welcome to the DTFC podcast. I'm Josh, host of the DTFC podcast. And today I'm recording with Dan and our special guest for today, Sarah Gray. Welcome. We will get to introductions shortly, but first I want to say, Dan, the Milk Crate Challenge is the new happening thing on social media right now. Was editing our last episode more or less painful than falling 7 feet onto the side of a milk crate onto a concrete floor?
So I don't know how to answer that. Sarah, do you know what the Milk Crate Challenge is?
No.
So I didn't know either, and Josh sends me this link of basically these people that stack these milk crates in like a pyramid kind of fashion, and you have to walk up the crate and then walk down the other side. And it sounds
easy.
like, it sounds like it shouldn't be that hard. You're like,
Yeah.
whatever, just walking up these crates, but they wobble. So it's basically just a bunch of videos of people just like bailing when they get to the top.
I have so many questions. Do you build it as you go?
No, it's all set up. There's like a particular way to set it up. But when you fall, like you've held a milk crate before, I assume. You land from a height onto a milk crate or several, or your head hits the floor. Like the falls are incredible and terrible, but also just great.
Sounds like a bunch of broken ribs.
Yeah.
At least. Yeah. Compare the experiences.
No, it was definitely not that bad.
Oh, okay, good.
No.
This is our second live show, first with a guest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we found that the last one was very smooth and kind of conversational, so we want to keep that up today.
Yep.
But also kind of stay on topic, which was not something that we did last time.
I think we did all right.
Think we did okay? Yeah.
We did okay.
You listened to it a few times, I think.
Quite a few.
Yeah. Is there anything, I think this is something we should kind of do regularly now, but is there anything that you wanted to follow up on from last time, or?
Not specifically. I mean, I think we're probably going to do like a whole episode on just reviewing and
Recaps.
critiquing, recapping that, but
Cool.
I think we can probably just skip to Sarah, who's going to maybe introduce herself, but I guess maybe I'll do an intro because Josh always wants me to do an intro. So Sarah works for Job Junction, which is, I guess, another company in the employment space, which is kind of how I got connected to her. And basically we've been doing virtual meetings or calls for pretty much the past year. And this is, I guess, our first opportunity to have an in-person chat and session. So, I mean, welcome and thanks for joining us today. And maybe you can go into what's going on with you and give us your story.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Like Dan said, we've been chatting virtually for almost a year now. When we met, it was because we had shared some similar values around the employment space and trying to help out students and entry-level talent, and we got talking and really connected, so I'm really happy to be here. Working for Job Junction. It's a company that works in many facets of employment, so we provide recruitment services for companies who are looking to hire tech and sales talent, anything from entry level to C-suite staff. And we do things like run a boot camp, really trying to focus on building those employable skills, developing resumes and interview skills, helping with the Canadian business culture, so that some of our foreign students and entry-level candidates can have a fair shot in interviews and things like that. And also Architect, which is a company that works to do software development. So we booted that up throughout the pandemic when there were a lot of companies that didn't have a very large online presence that were suffering. So we helped for a lower cost to do some web development, and it would give some of our boot camp students some experience with that hands-on skills that they learned in school that they could talk about on their resumes and in their interviews for some of those first jobs out of school.
Cool. Yeah, and Sarah, just so you know, like the guests that we've had on the show so far, we've tried to aim at that kind of student audience. We've had like founders of companies, we've had engineers that have kind of told us their story of how their career developed. Who else have we had?
Director at a bank.
Right? Yeah. We had a student himself who had created like a side hustle that was really successful come on. But I think you're the first one that really has expertise in the area that we're kind of aiming at, or at least that expertise that generalizes into that area very well. So I'm excited to have this conversation and kind of bring that out. I'll say like my first impression of you is much different than what I expected. I think I mentioned that already. So we'll bring out some of that history and maybe explain why that's the case. Yeah, anything else that you want to do, Dan?
Yeah, I think let's just see where it goes, right?
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with the nursing, because that was kind of the hook for me, like your kind of employment history and your transition from nursing to being a recruiter.
Yeah.
So do you mind just covering that story and what that was about?
For sure, absolutely. So I got into nursing because of my compassion and empathy for people and wanting to make an impact, wanting to make a difference. I got a lot from being able to give that energy to people. So I started my nursing career. I was actually a mom of a 1-year-old when I went to school. So I chose the RPN route because it's only 2.5 years versus the 4-year.
All right.
Yeah, like the bachelor program.
Yeah, okay.
A degree versus a diploma. And so I got through my schooling and found my first job as a visiting nurse. And as a visiting nurse, I worked in a very low, like a much lower demographic area, caring for patients that didn't have a lot of access, really low income, and not a lot of supports. And it was really hard. There's a lot of red tape with like government funded things. So it's really hard to go above and beyond for these people. And they always kind of fell through the cracks. And as a person who was super compassionate and giving, there was never a moment where I felt like I had done enough and could just walk away from a visit and be like, I'm going to sleep well.
Yeah.
So that really wore on me. And I was quickly recruited into palliative care because even within the visiting nursing, that was my passion. I mentioned earlier that palliative care chooses you, you don't choose it. And that was definitely the case for myself. It matched my values a lot. So I started at the hospice and quickly moved into more of a management level, dealt with some of the inner workings of the business, really fell in love with processes, developing processes and procedures and building efficiencies, and really saw the value in staffing and retention and training and just employee satisfaction. We grew really, really quickly with the hospice. We had some big funding and we expanded. So we grew staff-wise very quickly, and change is really hard. So I got a good look at change management and how important that is. So we definitely felt some growing pains, and I felt like that gave me a good perspective of just how intricate teamwork is and how important it is to have your team working evenly and together. So that created my first fascination with more the business side of things. Feeling kind of burnt out at this point as like a very compassionate person. And so I went back to school to finish my degree. And it wasn't until I was sitting in my social determinants of health class, trying to talk more solution-based conversations, that I realized I was in the wrong profession, unfortunately. I knew I had a lot of compassion and insight to give, but I was putting that energy in the wrong area. So just for context, social determinants of health are things like employment, education, income. So the idea of that is those are things that determine your overall health. And so the lower side of things, like the less you have of those, the more susceptible you are to chronic conditions and then lack of access to things. And it rang true because I saw that a lot in my visiting nursing in the area that I worked in. So I really wanted to talk more about solutions to those, what we could do to improve those things, to be more preventative than reactive, which is how I felt as a nurse going in as a Band-Aid solution to a lot of those problems. And it left me feeling really helpless. And it wasn't a conversation that was very willing to happen in that space. They felt that was, the focus was more about just awareness as a nurse, opposed to being the ones that come up with solutions to stop the problem in it all to itself. So yeah, I realized very quickly that I was in the wrong space, and my partner at the time was starting a business in the employment area, which is now Job Junction. So I jumped on board with that, cut ties to the nursing, which was a very hard transition, but left that space, and I feel that same fire and passion in what I do with Job Junction, and I get the same energy from the work that I do. I feel like it gives back the same way it did with the nursing, but it feels like a earlier game, we're building solutions to help the economy and help our society in the long term.
Cool. And yeah, I really like your story and the way that you tell it, because and just full transparency on my part, when I read your kind of company profile before having this conversation, I do know a few nurses, and my impression of the nursing business is that when you're finished your education, you're thrown to the wolves, essentially. So I figured, okay, here's a person who's probably thrown to the wolves and then sort of looked for a way out. But that's very much not the case. In fact, you saw kind of a unfortunate situation and wanted to get a little bit ahead of it. So I think that's actually something you probably share with Dan, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why it's very easy to talk about these kinds of issues and stuff. And I like the fact that you're focused on solutions, because that was always a thing for me as well. I've heard enough problems, right? It's time to actually let's get in there and find some solutions, or create them ourselves, or whatever needs to get done, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know all the problems until you try to start solving them either, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I wanted to ask you mentioned kind of a hesitation about going forward in nursing being the need for more education. Did you pursue anything else from a business lens? Because you're very fluid with kind of the language and that. I work in a big corporation, so I'm flooded with it all the time, but you seem very kind of effortless with it.
Yeah, I didn't actually.
Okay.
So it's all self-learned.
Yeah.
I did a lot of research, have watched a lot of YouTube videos. I've read some great books. Definitely recommend Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Incredible.
Yep.
Any entrepreneur will love that book.
The only book I've ever read.
Yeah.
The last 10 years. So yes.
Also the only one he's ever recommended, so I can verify this. He's not making this up.
Yeah, that one's incredible. Elon Musk's book is really good. Just getting inside the brains of these heavy hitters in the entrepreneur world, and yeah, that's been all I've had.
Okay.
Surrounding myself with bright people, obviously understanding the value. Yeah, everybody's looking at the door. No one in here.
Where?
Yeah, so networking and understanding the value of networking, I've learned a lot from other people too.
So you mentioned kind of getting really invested in the clients when you talked about nursing and transferring into a position where you could be more proactive and maybe get that same kind of reward. Do you have any rewarding experiences that kind of come to mind easily for you?
Oh, totally.
Okay.
Oh, anytime I spend a couple of hours revising somebody's resume, supporting them with interview skill practice, and seeing them land that dream job. It is the best feeling ever. Yeah. Because I know that this is the pivotal moment in their life. Far more than a broken arm that's got you hauled up in your hospital bed. You will probably forget about that broken arm by the time you're in your 30s. But being that pivotal factor in someone finding that job that is going to transform their life and basically be the start of their future is so powerful. I love it.
And do they reconnect with you?
All the time. Yeah. Oh yeah. And I like to keep tabs and check in and just see how things are going. And we often see a lot of people revisit us after they've spent some time at that job, especially in the entry-level space. Typically people are only in an entry-level position for 1 to 2 years, and then they're moving on to a more intermediate level position. So they'll come back to us and receive our help for future employment opportunities as well. So
cool. And I can kind of speak to that too, because I out of high school, I kind of navigated my way slowly through university, and then ended up working at a hotel afterwards. And I was hired by a hiring director, not hired, but I met her and she invited me for an interview, just after a random encounter in that hotel. And I think about that day all the time, even today, because it really, just like you said, it really is a pivotal day for people in that position, and one that relieves so much stress. Like we call it, like, I don't know, I have a circle of people that maybe includes you, but I kind of call it your first like grown-up job, right? And it's a huge stress factor, and I feel like it's so much harder to find that than it needs to be today. So maybe we'll address some of the reasons why.
Yeah,
excited to.
Sounds good.
I've heard, so there's some big shifts, and I think technology is the fuel to that. So if you think of Moore's Law and how things accelerate, and the fact that technology doesn't really have much of a learning curve, its acceleration and its development is far faster than human growth. So we really struggle to adapt to technology, and I think we're seeing issues in that now with job shortages and difficulty finding jobs with new systems like applicant tracking systems and things like that. Us as humans are struggling to adapt to the advancements in the technology. And there's not a lot of resources out there. You have to be so proactive in staying on top of all of these advancements, and that can be really hard.
Interesting. The way I kind of see it from where I'm standing, maybe Dan, you have a different position on this, is that there's kind of these really forward-thinking technological companies that are emerging that you almost feel like you need to either have expertise in, I don't know, law or engineering or something that will really help you contribute to that business at that early stage and make an impact that's worth it for a business that's really tight on funds. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have these big corporations that move really, really slowly and are using, Excel for everything and, trying to transform, but also going through a really tumultuous, unpleasant process. So how, as an entry-level person, is there a middle ground there? And is that part of what your company's trying to fill? Or am I just reading that totally wrong?
No, I definitely see what you're saying there. I totally agree. We've got those really aggressively proactive and progressive companies, and then we have the ones that are lagging behind, and it does make for a tumultuous environment for job seekers. I think there's a space for entry level anywhere, but it's hard, and we're seeing more and more shift to more like gig work, contract, self-employment, and what's unfortunate is our education system isn't properly preparing people for that workforce.
Yeah, that's your cue, I think, Dan.
Absolutely. Am I allowed to talk about that yet? We're going to say that.
Yeah, I don't know.
20 episodes from now.
That's right. That was kind of going to be a reveal at some point, I think. But thanks, Sarah. You just blew it wide open.
Sorry. You have to invite me back for that one because I have a lot to say.
Yeah, we might not have enough time for that today.
That's okay. But how does your experience kind of with the activities that you've done with DTFC so far kind of mirror Sarah's experience or even also?
It's very similar. I mean, contract work, basically like the gig economy, that kind of stuff. I think that's the hardest part, right? Like you said, there's these companies that are on the smaller finance side or smaller companies, but they need to get stuff done fast, right? So they don't really want to hire the entry level people, right? And then you have the bigger companies who could afford to hire the entry-level people, but now there's thousands of applicants because there's so much competition now. So basically, I call it the entry-level dilemma, which is okay, you don't have a job, so you can't get experience, but you don't have any experience, you can't get a job, and there's thousands or if not millions of people that are stuck in that realm. So it's what do you do, right? And I think that's where companies like Job Junction and hopefully DTFC as well is trying to help create solutions to those problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're at such a time of change in all of that. I think it's a really hard spot to be in. Companies, employers don't understand the value of contract and freelance work. So people don't have any choice but to go into building their own little entity. I see it a lot with graphic design, web development. Those are pretty common freelance positions. But employers don't understand the value of that. So I think we're lagging a little bit, and we're feeling the effects of that. It's a bit of a pain point, but there's certainly lots that can be done in the meantime. So just from what I've seen in the past, there's certainly things that can help with that. I don't know if that's something we want to talk about now.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I kind of want to just ask, just to clarify, when you say employers don't understand the value, do you mean when they're looking at a resume and they see things that people have done independently?
Just when they're like looking to structure their company.
Okay.
You know, so I see it a lot with companies that do like software development. So like a software development company that brings on clients to do their software projects. So a lot of companies, you know, don't have their own software engineering division, so they hire a company to come in and do that for them, build their website or a mobile application or something. And those companies experience such fluctuation in their work and the type of work that they do, because they're working with so many different clients in different domains like healthcare, finance. And you want to be really efficient in that industry. You want to hire someone who has experience in that area or can work well in that area. So it's hard to bring somebody on as a full-time permanent person in that setting, because they have to be really adaptable. People do learn and become very proficient in all of those areas, but it's a long learning curve. And I see a lot of layoffs happening, and it's a lot of up and down in the company in terms of hiring. But doing more like contract work and things like that is great. But on the other side, we have to learn how to be more professional as job seekers and as the employee that's being contracted, because there's a lot of responsibility in being a contract, like having a contract relationship versus a full-time permanent.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of part of one of the obstacles, is that a company has a bad experience with someone who's contracting, just like you said, that's not professional, and now there's all these obstacles to doing it again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge I see, even like doing this similar kind of stuff with students. Is, I mean, they're so green or new that you literally have to teach them like what probably took the rest of us years to figure out, and in full-time jobs to be able to get to the contract level.
Exactly.
Right? Because the contract is almost like its own, you're basically like your own business owner.
Yeah.
Right? Which most people don't even understand that from as an employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to not only know how to be an employee, and then you have to learn how to become a business owner and run your own business by yourself without guidance or mentorship, which is, I think, where like companies like ours can fit in, because obviously they are the talent that are able to take on these kinds of projects, but they don't have necessarily the mindset, I think is probably the way I'd put it, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that mindset is so absorbable. Like, I think schools should be focusing on that more, that like creativity, critical thinking, communication, like those are the foundational skills that you need to represent yourself in a business setting and to be self-employed. So those are kind of the core skills I'd say are the most important to be learning and developing while you're in school, that will help you be successful when it comes to trying to find that first job.
Right, which I think is maybe the opposite of what a lot of students think, especially the ones I talk to. I don't know if your experience is the same, but I think everybody wants to focus so much on like these technical aspects of things, right? And they avoid or like just overlook these, I guess, non-technical or maybe softer kinds of skills, but turns out that's actually what's going to make the difference, right?
Exactly. 100%. I always see, especially in the degree programs where it's very focused on like theory and developing those hard skills, and then they graduate and all they have are the hard skills, but that's not what's going to land you the job, and it's not what sets you apart from literally anybody else in your program. You're all graduating with identical resumes unless you have things to talk about, or what I like to focus on are the transferable skills and the professional values, because those are the things that will make you stand out, not the hard skills.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I'm glad somebody else can explain this to them, because
yeah, we cover this all the time, and I wonder if people are tired of hearing. Not exactly in the way that you did, but yeah,
repetition,
right?
Repetition,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's a hot topic right now for sure. I feel like people are starting to talk about it more. And it's becoming more recognized even in interviews. Like I hear hiring managers and employers talking more about recognizing soft skills and understanding the difference between unteachable and teachable skills.
Cool. So, okay, we really transitioned quickly out of your background and into the leveraging your expertise into stuff. So instead of just trying to carve the show up into two parts, we're just going to jump into those questions, I think. And the first one I kind of wanted to open up with is just pretty simply like, what are as a recruiter, what do job seekers not know that you know?
That's a great question.
Sorry, I asked it kind of awkwardly, but
No.
I think it kind of captures the.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. There's a lot, I think. And it's hard. It's been a while since I've been a job seeker, but I work with job seekers a lot. And what I see is kind of what we just talked about, like understanding the value of those soft skills and developing them early. And so getting ahead of the curve and putting time and energy into developing those earlier on and getting some hands-on experience. The value of volunteer work. Companies don't like to hire someone on for 3 months and pay them a minimum wage when basically the whole time they're there, they're just training them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take any opportunity you can to have an experience that you can talk about on your resume, in interviews, that's really going to give you a leg up. The other thing that I see a lot, build yourself, so I do a lot of technical, but this works for anybody. Build yourself a portfolio. Start putting together a portfolio of experiences that you've had. If you're in the tech space, developing a website right away. Again, staying on the technical strand of things, GitHub is super important, and all the employers are looking at it. All the employers are looking at your LinkedIn. They're looking at your social media. Get ahead of the curve, stay really professional with all of those things, put time and energy into developing it. And then when you do enter that job search space, it's not going to take you as long to update all of that. There's a lot of value in a really good resume. So getting help doing that is going to be helpful. People think that it should be something that's easy because it's not something that's taught. That's not the case. It's not taught, which means you're not expected to have those skills. So I see people who are often kind of embarrassed about their resume, but it's totally okay. No one learned how to write a resume in school. Everybody learned how to write an essay on some sort of
Super
scientific
useful,
process.
right?
Exactly.
If I could submit an essay, I'd get hired anywhere.
Exactly.
So maybe employers should start accepting essays and giving me a chance.
None of them are going to read it though. That's the problem.
Have an AI read it.
If it's more than
That's
3
true.
pages, it's going in the garbage. And in just the value of representing yourself. And the other piece is this new kind of, we call it the career-preneurial mindset. And it's basically what we talked about earlier, like getting into that mindset of being self-employed. Even if you are a full-time employee, the idea of the mindset of like you being a representative of yourself, the business of me, you are a professional, you went to school, you developed these skills, and you are adding value to the company in exchange for money, right? It's a value exchange. And you see it oftentimes, like a good example of this would be trades. Like there is a very clear value exchange. Someone comes in to put a roof on your house. If they do a crap job, you will never hire that person again. And they'll probably have a really hard time finding other opportunities for themselves. So they have to be really professional. They have to be perfect at their job. And like they're always representing themselves in their business. So that's the mindset that everybody needs to have going into employment, whether it's contract, self-employed, or full-time permanent position. And especially with this work from home wave, employers are going to be a lot more trusting of their employees if they have that essence of them, that high level of professionalism.
Right.
We get too comfortable with the full-time permanent contracts.
Yeah, exactly. So like one point I did want to just jump back to, and I'm going to play devil's advocate on it a little bit, because I have been saying the exact same thing to students in terms of the volunteering or basically trying to get something on their resume. But I'm going to try and take their stance on it just because I get a lot of pushback every time I provide that piece of advice. Why should they do that? Or what's the reason that they should be trying to do that instead of trying to get a paid position?
Because they're not going to get one. Like they're going to spend their whole summer looking for a paid position. And I get it. I get the value of getting that serving job and making great tip money and being able to put that towards your schooling or your cost of living or whatever. And I definitely wouldn't give this advice to somebody that was in a jeopardizing position that couldn't afford to do that. They still have a shot. They will absolutely have a shot. It might be a little more of an uphill battle, but they'll get there. This is for the people that can safely afford to put some of their time and effort into free work. I think companies aren't at a point where they're aware enough to pay for that level of service. So it's just, they're going to have a really hard time finding an opportunity. It's not to say not to. Of course, you can apply to more than one job. And even as you're working for free for a company and getting that experience, you could be on the side still applying to other paid positions. But it's just, you will make back what you've given doing that once you have an upper hand graduating with great employable skills and experiences.
Right. And so I totally agree. I think the part that, or the mindset that they come from is that they don't want to get taken advantage of. And I mean, the way I try to position it, and then maybe you can comment on this too, is you don't have to be committing to working for free forever, right? It could be, hey, I'll do this for you for a month or a few weeks or whatever it is. Like, define the timeline, define what you're trying to do, what's your objective, and essentially get your foot in the door, because that's what it is, right? And I think that's when, I mean, not to jump back to all your education points as well, but I think the real issue here is that people don't understand the concept of investing, right? You have to make an investment. I mean, that's what we all did in going to school, right? We invested in our careers by going to get an education, which eventually got us a job, which in our time frame actually worked out, but the landscape is changing now, right? So it's not the same anymore. And I think because we never maybe had those financial literacy courses or whatever to understand this concept of investment, every decision we make is investing. So should you invest in yourself by taking that free opportunity or working for somebody for free, even for a little time, to give you that opportunity to eventually get paid down the road, right?
Absolutely. Well, and it's funny because people will blindly go into school thinking, that that's just what you do. But if you look at that, it is an investment. And what are you getting from that? You're still struggling to find that first job.
Right.
So what's the big shy away from doing that? You're not only are you doing free work, you're actually paying to do that work while you're going to school. Whereas these employment opportunities that are unpaid or more volunteer basis, certainly going to add a lot more value back in terms of being more competitive when you graduate amongst some of your other colleagues. And I back to your point about using it as like a leveraging point. I totally agree, and I see people do that all the time. They'll say, let me show you how I work. I'll work for 4 weeks, and then we can talk again. And that's your shot to prove yourself. And what company can say no to that?
Exactly.
Free work, and they get to know you so that they can confidently be like, you're a good employee, 100%. We'll bring you on, we'll pay you for what you can do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like a next level probation period, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny just hearing you guys say this, because I've never heard this establish the timeline thing before. But playing that situation in my head, I have more respect for the person who's saying, hey, I'll do this for you for this length of time because it's good for me and good for you, than someone saying, hey, I'm so desperate to get a job, I will work for you for free. So I feel like it's almost empowering. It's definitely empowering for the volunteer, but from an employer perspective, it's also like, I don't know, it's almost like conscious clear. I really like that. That's a really, really good plan. I wanted to ask about the volunteering. If you're choosing between searching for unpaid work to do for someone else versus building a portfolio, doing something for yourself, how important is it to do something for someone else so that they can vouch for you down the line?
Very, very important.
Yeah, I feel like one of the issues today with the independent work kind of stuff, or starting your own business, is that it's very easy to say on a LinkedIn or on a resume that you did something, but if it's only yourself holding you to account and you don't necessarily have a project to show as a result of it, employers will be more likely to dismiss it.
Yeah.
So how does that add into the value of volunteer work?
Yeah, so absolutely. If you can work for somebody else for a while as a volunteer, transition yourself into a paid position if that opportunity presents itself. I would hold that at a higher value for sure, but time management is a key skill, and I would say being able to do a bit of both. So I think they go hand in hand, but there's so many aspects of this. It's a really complicated system, but it does work to the benefit of the job seeker, because at the end of the day, there are so many opportunities out there. You just have to be hungry enough to find it. So whether you do the volunteer work or you take the time to develop your website and your GitHub portfolio, networking is another huge foot in the door. And that's another skill that you should be conscientious of and trying to develop early, because there's so much value in networking, and it's always like who you know, not what you know, like that classic saying really holds true. A lot of the entry-level talent that I see that don't have a lot of high school experience or co-op experience, they get their first job through somebody that they know. So, keeping your door open and starting early with your networking is just going to position you well to find an opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've talked about networking pretty much every episode.
Yeah.
It's important.
It's huge, right?
It comes up and it's important, but it's also one of those things that you get resistance from, I think. That's like, and even when you guys were talking about the brand stuff, when I first heard be your own brand, I found it gross and slimy. And it wasn't until someone said, run your own business, that it actually resonated with me. Like, I need to be doing the cost benefit of everything that I'm doing as an employee from the perspective of a business owner. And I can remember the shift in that and how it just like changed all my priorities in my own work. So I thought that was much more powerful than messages change over time and that's how it goes. But yeah, some of them expire and new ones take their place, and I think that's a good one. Okay, I wanted to play devil's advocate on something you said as well, because I think people go to university or go to trade schools even potentially with the attitude that I need to learn a hard skill that someone needs to teach me to have value on the market, and anyone can learn soft skills, so why would I go out of my way to develop those? Like, I'll just figure that out as I go. So why is that wrong?
It's not wrong. Definitely the point of the education system is to teach hard skills. They don't do it very efficiently. They drag it on for months and months, and you actually learn a lot faster, being immersed in it and being exposed to the practical components of all the hard skills that you're developing. It's also not super efficient for every single person. The way they teach is tailored to one specific learning style most of the time. Now, we are seeing some progression in some of those areas, offering co-ops and things like that. So I do see universities and colleges adapting to other learning styles, but I'd just say at the end of the day, it's still very much like one size fits all. So that can be really hard for people's development of those hard skills. So yeah, for sure, the hard skills are important, but you're gonna learn them on the job. Oftentimes those are the teachable components, whereas the soft skills can be non-teachables. There are teachable soft skills, but there's a handful that aren't.
Can you give some examples?
I would say at the root of it, it's your professional values.
Okay.
So, what your life experiences provided you as an individual to like create interest in certain areas. And so in turn that gives you skills like motivation and enthusiasm and like things that would make you good at your job.
Okay.
And to me, those aren't things that you can learn in a structured environment.
Okay. I hear Coach Dan ruminating over here.
Interesting.
So Dan thinks anyone can be taught anything.
So yeah, I think fundamentally I technically have to disagree.
Yeah.
Just ahead. Only because I think that I think you could probably create a scenario to create that motivation or create that interest. But I agree with you. I think that the education system is not designed to do that. Like one of the ideas I had recently was just even just how we teach concepts, right? It's like it kind of going back to our critical thinking exercise or discussion. But basically, if you're trying to learn how to think critically, the application itself isn't necessarily important, right? So you can critically think about anything. So like, I mean, we were kind of talking earlier about like that TV show that like my little cousins were watching, right? They maybe don't know how to add yet, or they don't know how to do this or write an essay, but they can tell me every little detail about this ridiculous show where they don't even speak words. And that shows me that they have a capacity to learn something, to be able to now discuss it and tell you about it, and they know exactly what this person's going to do, and they've watched it a million times, so they've now taken this one thing that, okay, they're never going to teach you like that in school, but they now have learned how to analyze something, right, essentially, right? So there's things like that that I think are in the back of my mind. It's like I want to believe that there's a way to teach certain things like that, but yeah, it's maybe not like obvious right away.
And I think the problem is some people don't come across a situation that provides them with the opportunity to learn and develop those. And so let's jump into the shoes of an employer and dealing with a challenging employee. So what makes poor qualities of an employee? Someone who's lazy, who doesn't have a very good work ethic. And why is that? They're not motivated. They're not passionate about what they do. So why did they get into the field that they went into? What led them down that path? This is the person that's really disruptive in the workplace, that calls in all the time because he doesn't want to come in. Like, what creates that internal, intrinsic motivation to show up every day and do a good job, do the best you can do? So for me, those are the skills that I find are most important. Those are your employable skills. Your hard skills, you can teach a monkey to do, basic coding. My 8-year-old went to a Lego class and learned how to code in a couple of minutes. He got to go in and do all of that. And there's a lot of detail in, multiple web applications. He certainly couldn't do that, but it's something that, like, that learning style and learning those hard skills is just, it's in a different setting than learning those soft skills. And some people don't get the opportunity to develop those soft skills.
Right.
So, like, how do you create an environment for people to learn those soft skills and work on those that complements their education system? Because it's so time intensive. Going through school, you're in there for 4, 6, 10 years, and it's costly, and it takes up all of your time. How do you focus your energy on developing those soft skills? And to me, the last thing an education system does is create an environment for you to develop those. And don't get me wrong, like the social environments you get put in are super important, and there's a lot of self-discovery that happens. Usually your first time away from home, you're learning to be independent, and think critically, become a problem solver. How do you change a light bulb? It's your first house. There are certainly skills that are very valuable that you experience that first time away from home. But how do you keep fostering that alongside developing those hard skills? That's where I think, being able to set some time aside for the practical experiences and those employment opportunities that may not be super glorious but are in your field, those are really important.
No, I think it's tough for sure, because I don't see a lot of ways to incorporate people's interests necessarily into their learning, but I think that's the way learning should be. If I'm like honest about how I think we could solve this fairly quickly and I'm pretty sure Elon Musk did this with he started his own school, right?
Yeah, I read something like that too.
Yeah, and I think his whole thing was, okay, like, here's an engine, let's take it apart and then put it back together or whatever. Like, it's like discoverable, like, or discovery based learning, right? Which I think is huge because it like allows you to be interested in it. And on top of that, you don't need to learn things unnecessarily, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to learn what a wrench is because now we have to use it to actually do this project, right? Otherwise, like, we're learning all these things. I mean, we kind of talked about it last time. Like, there's certain subjects, like, I don't really want to study or care about, and like that reduces my internal motivation even to go to school in the first place, right? So I think there's a way to structure this whole thing that could be increasing our ability to even like foster that internal motivation, which then gives us capacity to learn how to use it, and then maybe that's more helpful in the workplace, right?
Absolutely. There are some schools that take that approach, one being the Future Design School. There's one out of Markham, and I heard a woman from there talk at True North, the True North conference here in Kitchener.
Okay.
And it was really empowering, like really, really powerful speech about like those core skills that we talked about earlier: communication, creativity, critical thinking. There was a fourth, I can't remember. It was the 4 C's. And that like fostering those skills were more important than any of the other like more structured learning environments, like silos of subjects. There's not a lot of carryover. They brought in like I think it was like the story she told was about an 11-year-old, and she asked him what he was passionate about, and he said cars, and she was like, oh, like tell me about a problem you've heard about cars. And he's like, oh, like electric cars, and no one wants to buy electric cars. And she's like, why do you think that? And so they walked through this whole like, this is the problem, and they got down to the source of the problem, which was, well, there's not a lot of outlets for charging. There's a lot of resistance to being able to charge your vehicle on the go, and batteries only last 400 to 600 kilometers. That's not very much. It's less than a tank of gas. Now this big obstacle people have to get over to transition to cars, and so they created an app that allowed, it was like an Airbnb but for your charging station. You could pay to rent somebody's hydro in their driveway to charge your car along the way, and people could post, you know, their electricity that they were offering, and they get a little bit of cash for it, and someone can plan their trip around people who are offering that. An 11-year-old came up with that. Like so
idea.
Many people.
Damn.
I know, right? So many people have the answers to our problems today that we're facing, and they just need to be unlocked. And I feel like we need to create environments for people to have the freedom to get to those solutions, because there's so many solutions out there, and that's going to in turn create more jobs. That's a big one that I want to see. More entrepreneurship, more creativity in how we go about solving these problems, because that in turn is going to help our economy and create more jobs and more wealth within our area. So those are really important pieces.
Right. And so I mean, this kind of is like a parallel topic about it, but I think this kind of leads into the concept of like being passionate about your job. Right. And I think that's almost a challenge for people even at the entry level, which I wouldn't have suspected at the beginning, or like even when we started our careers. I think we just kind of had like that sense of responsibility of, okay, you go to school and then you go get a job, and like we'll figure out what we like later. But I think the attitude now is changing or shifting so quickly that people are focusing on, okay, what do I want to do? Like a lot of the kids I talk to they have huge dreams of all these things they want to do like already. And like, I never even thought about starting a business until like a couple of years ago, right? But these guys already have it all planned out, or at least like the big vision. But I think that also like works against them in terms of this internal motivation, right? Because they're like already thinking 5 steps ahead. They're like, I want to start this company, but first I have to get this job at this place that I don't really want to work at, doing this thing I don't really like doing. So should I go do it? Or maybe I just won't get a job this summer and I'll just kind of live off my parents' money and stay at home, right?
I think it's an interesting mindset to have, and if they're looking into going into their own business, then they better be creative about it, because they're going to need to be creative to be successful in their own business. And what I like to see is someone use their skills as a tool to propel themselves through their life and get to those goals. So figure out what you're good at. Figure out what you're good at young, go to school, focus in on those hard skills, and then the interest and the passion will come with the company and the company's values. Like, I think people overlook company values a lot. They apply to a job because they're hiring. It's a big name. You need to do your research into the company and figure out what that company's values are. You know, if your interests are environmental, and economy, you know, wanting to make an impact on the environment, look for companies whose focus is sustainability. Whether you're IT or you are HR, if you're working in a company who shares your values and where you want to get to in life, you're going to find motivation.
Right. Do you think that's something that they should be focusing on at the entry level though? Because I think that's the challenge. It's like we're asking them to volunteer, right? Or like take these unpaid jobs or go work at a certain place or whatever, just to get their foot in the door. But now they're also being like stretched the other way, saying, okay, well, only work for companies, or not only, but look for companies where the culture matches your beliefs and your values and all that. So like maybe those are opposing forces. So like where do we end up, right? Like should they be in the middle, or do they need to go one way first or the other, or like what do you think?
I think it has to be what feels right for that person. Some people are going to have the ability to wait it out and find that right job because that's important to them. Other people are going to just want to get the experience and go in. There isn't a wrong answer. You know, it's not going to set you back 5 years if you wait and hold out for that really good job that fits your values, or you take the first year opportunity that comes through. Like going back to the basics, obviously having that professional experience can be leverage for you in finding that better job. And not a lot of people like their first job. They just kind of have to do it. You're not an expert in your field at that point either. So, you know, no matter what profession you're in, you know, I didn't get to do all of the fancy nursing things for the first year of my career either. But there was that, like, I found motivation in knowing that this was a stepping stone and that I had to kind of get through this to have the tools in my belt to achieve the bigger things. So I think that's an important mindset to have, and certainly wouldn't want anyone to be in a jeopardizing situation in that first entry level job. Like, don't go work for some, you know, black market Joe Schmo. You know, like, you want your first experience to be good. Like, don't get yourself into trouble. Yeah. It's not that important. Like, you know, wait until you find something where you're safe and you're working in the field that you want to be developing your skills in, and, you know, obviously leverage your willingness to work for a cheaper price to get you through the door. There's that option, or there's the networking option. You know, you don't have to throw all the eggs in one basket there. You know, you don't walk into your dad's office and say you'll work for free if, you know, they're willing to pay you. It's just about knowledge. It's making an informed decision in taking those first steps. So know all of your options and play the cards as things unfold for you. I think that's what's important.
I think, like, my personal experience almost says the second job is really where you apply the passion stuff. And when you were talking, Dan, a moment that I had clicked with me where I got my first, like, beyond entry level job, and it was more project based, and my boss at the time, who was a VP, was asking, like, what kind of career direction do you want to go in? And I was like, well, what needs to get done? And she was like, well, what do you want to do? And then we both just sat there for a little while. And I was like, I feel like this isn't working, or like something is off here. But there definitely is an expectation at a certain level that maybe you have a vague working of the machinery that's kind of happening behind the scenes, and when you're directing yourself, you know where you want to contribute in that machinery. And at that stage in my career, I was not taking the initiative to have that already kind of mapped out. But that was kind of a moment for me. So I definitely think you guys are on the right track here.
Yeah, I like that. I like that contribution to the conversation. I think that's a good mindset to have. Use that first year of entry level as like a playground to figure out what you do like. You know, take as many opportunities within the company as you can to explore different areas so that you can hone in on what your passion is. You might find something you weren't expecting that you were really good at or that you really enjoyed. And that's a great opportunity to be able to do that. And companies will like to see that initiative too, that
Absolutely.
interest in different areas.
Yeah, so my pushback question on that is, what if what you like to do is not something that the company puts a high premium on in terms of salary or prestige? How do you kind of balance that trade-off?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. My answer will always come back to, you kind of have to do what feels right to you. Mm-hmm. You know, if you feel like you're suffering along and you can make the sacrifice financially or whatever to do what you enjoy doing, then it's worth it. And I think there's leverage in dealings with the company. There's inside conversations that you can have to, try and have things go in your favor. But do you want to like clarify that question at all? Like, did I answer it okay? I feel like...
No, yeah, I think that's a good answer. I think we're almost on time for a break, actually, if we want to take a break. I know we're kind of coming up on 9 o'clock already, so
sure.
I know I could use a break.
Sure.
Want to have a cut moment? Cut.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
That was awesome.
Good.